Okay, 8.12 is identifying relative extrema and increasing / positive graphically. I know that's not very grammatically correct, but that's what Delta Math calls it. So what we're basically doing is talking about what a relative extreme is and what that means on a graph. So what I wrote down here is that a relative extreme, think of relative is compared to other things around it, like something's relatively easy that's maybe easy for you but not somebody else, or it's easy compared to your other classes, compared to something. So when we're talking about a relative extreme, it's any point that's relatively high or low. And so I want you to think of high as like a hill and low as like a valley. So it doesn't have to be the highest point you see. It just has to be high compared to the points right around it. So it's just a hill or a valley. Okay? And so sometimes they'll ask you for any relative extreme, which could be the hills and or the valleys. And then sometimes it'll simply ask for just the relative mins, which is just the valleys, or it might ask for just the relative maxes, which is are the hills. Number 1 says the function f of x is graphed below. How many points on the graph represent a relative extreme value? So they don't even care about the letter names. They just want to know how many points. Extreme values are all the mins and maxes. So point A is not the highest on the graph. Actually, F is. That's called an absolute max at F. But they are not going to ask you on this. That's an absolute, the highest it ever goes. But A is actually a relative max because it's relatively high compared to everything around it. It's the peak of this hill. B is not the lowest the graph ever goes. Actually, these ends go down lower, but it's relatively low compared to the points around it. It makes this little valley. C is actually another relative max because, again, it's not super high, but it's high compared to what's directly around it. D is a relative min. E is nothing. That's just a 0, but it's just like on this continuous curve here, so that's nothing. This is also considered a relative max. And then G is nothing, that's just a 0, but we're just decreasing the whole time. And so that gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 relative extreme values. Number 2, we've got another function. How many points on the graph represent a relative maximum? So relative maximums would be at B, because that's a hill, and F. So there's 2. Relative minimums would be D, and that's it. So 1. Because you can't have endpoints count as anything. They're not points. They're not relatively low because they're just going to keep going lower and lower and lower. So that's all on that. There are 2 more problems if you go to page 10 of your notes. And this is simply talking about increasing, decreasing stuff, positive, negative. So as the function f of x is graphed below, what is true about the graph on the interval from x is negative infinity to x equals a? This kind of goes along with our in behavior. When x is negative infinity, that means x keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that would be going this direction. 2, x is a. So let me highlight. We're talking about the graph that's here forever and then stops to here at x is a. So where is our piece of our graph at? Right here. What is it doing? Okay, we don't want to read it going to the arrow. We want to read it from left to right. So if this was a roller coaster, you're increasing, but the y values are under the x-axis. These y values are negative. So we want to pick the one that says it is negative and increasing. Okay, so negative means, so negative / positive means is it above or below the x-axis? So it's talking about the y values. And then the increasing, decreasing, you can think of slope, but you got to make sure you're reading it from left to right. Okay, let's try number 4. Function f of x is graphed below. What is true about the graph on the interval from point C to D? So we're thinking of here, to here. So highlighting it might help you. We're only talking about this part of our graph. So again, I'm increasing and I'm above the y-axis or x-axis. I'm in the positive y, so I want to say it's positive and it's increasing.